Hello, everyone, dear Manhwa fans. I hope you are having an amazing day. Before we begin, I want to give a very special shout out to those who left their comments on the previous video. A big hug to Jesus Ayala 1347, who was the fastest to leave the first comment last time. Thank you so much. Now, without further delay, let's dive into this thrilling summary. The story begins one night when our protagonist, Kay, wonders why people seem to ignore the balance between work and personal life. This thought had been bothering him lately since he was exhausted from working overtime every single day, to the point where he questioned if he would ever get home at a decent hour. However, he decided to stop complaining since he would soon be working remotely and just needed to hold on a little longer. It was then that he stopped by a convenience store and found a new drink, Alka, which he had seen advertised on TV. It looked like a soda, but after so much work, he wasn't about to refuse it. When he reached the register, the cashier apologized for the alcoholic content of the drink, though he was already aware. She even reminded him that the product contained alcohol, and because of that, they couldn't sell it to minors. A bit annoyed, Kay replied that it was obvious he didn't look underage, but the cashier, equally frustrated, explained that they had faced problems in the past, even having to pay a hefty fine for similar situations. Slightly irritated, he remarked that he was in a good mood and had no intention of arguing, but if she wanted, she could call the police. At that moment, with a serious expression, the cashier asked him to show some ID, which annoyed him since he had previously bought a similar drink without any issues. When checking his wallet, Kay realized he had forgotten his ID and couldn't remember where he had left it. He tried to apologize to the cashier and explain that, despite his youthful appearance, he was 27 years old and had just finished a long day working at a corporate job, even showing her his employee badge. However, before he could mention that he was a regular customer, the cashier started calling the police, forcing him to leave. Once outside, he cursed his height and face, as at 27 years old, he couldn't even buy a cider without ID. He couldn't believe it, although at the same time he was disheartened, realizing it had always been like this. Kay reflects on how his short height and youthful appearance have always felt like chains tying him to some kind of curse. He is 165 centimeters tall, slightly below average, and has always looked much younger than he actually is. He often feels insecure about his looks, remembering how, back in high school, he was the same height. During his first physical examination before enlisting in the Army, nothing had changed, and the same happened during his first medical checkup at work. He has always dealt with these struggles, with even the shopping mall staff often recommending him kids' clothes, and waiters frequently mistaking his order and bringing him meals from the children's menu. He never considered getting into sports, especially because his friends teased him daily. However, what hurt him the most was when his girlfriend back in school said that his height and childlike appearance embarrassed her. In the present, he tries not to think about these things since they only make him upset. Upon arriving home, he decides to play on his PC, which he is quite proud of, equipped with high-end accessories and games. According to him, the best kind of game is the one you enjoy with the best settings. So he started an online match. However, he soon recognized a familiar scent. Someone was smoking. Annoyed, he opened the window, already knowing that someone in his building smoked from morning till night. He couldn't understand how they did it, as he felt like he could barely breathe. He wanted to go talk to his neighbor, but before knocking, he reminded himself to be polite and courteous, even if he felt a bit nervous as he approached the doorbell. Just then, he heard a loud crash and suddenly saw a man flying out of the apartment, smashing into the wall. The man looked like a martial artist, and the last thing he managed to say was Mapo Grizzly Bear, which sounded like the name of a formidable opponent, before losing consciousness. Kay noticed the man had several injuries, making him doubt if he had really been fighting a bear. He wasn't sure what had happened, but he started to consider just letting the matter go. The next morning, however, he decided not to give up. This situation was affecting his health, and he needed to make his neighbor stop smoking. He knew that no one could resist a gift, especially if it was high-quality meat. So he figured it might be a good way to resolve the issue. Cautiously, he rang the doorbell and heard a voice asking who it was. Kay introduced himself as the neighbor and said he brought a gift, which sparked the neighbor's interest. Seeing the door start to open, he thought his plan had worked. However, before he could say anything, the man grabbed the meat, thanked him, and slammed the door right in his face. Kay had no idea what had just happened, but he instantly knew his plan had failed. From that day on, he filed a complaint with the maintenance office and tried waiting for his neighbor in the recycling area, doing everything he could, but nothing worked. The smoke kept tormenting him day and night. He couldn't relax or even sleep properly in his own apartment. For over a week, he had been tossing and turning in bed, unable to escape the stench he hated so much. The tobacco smell filled every corner of his apartment, soaking into every inch and driving him to desperation. Tired of living like this and considering how much he had invested in his home, Kay decided once more to confront his neighbor and put an end to his misery. Inside the apartment, someone was exercising. Or rather, it was a woman who, after hearing the doorbell ring repeatedly, grew irritated. Outside, Kay stood waiting for the door to open, determined to be firm, knowing he was the victim in this situation and had no reason to be afraid. The door slowly opened, and a voice asked who dared to interrupt her during her routine. When the woman stepped out, Kay blushed as he noticed that, besides looking quite angry, she was tall and muscular, almost like a professional fighter. Still visibly annoyed, the woman demanded to know who he was. Kay trembled, unsure of what to say, especially noticing the huge height difference between them. Nervously, he compared the situation to a Welsh corgi facing a hungry wolf. The woman firmly insisted he answer, and stuttering, he said that he was her neighbor, though in his mind he didn't even know where to look. Ignoring his reply, the woman stepped even closer, making Kay feel even more uneasy. In a threatening tone, she asked again why he was there. With effort, Kay gathered some courage, which the woman noticed immediately, and he blurted out, telling her to stop smoking. The place fell silent, and Kay instinctively took a defensive stance as the woman suddenly burst into laughter. She seemed amused that he had finally dared to confront her, as she had already heard rumors about the constant complaints about the smoke. She then asked what he would do if she told him she wasn't going to stop smoking. Kay, feeling a little discouraged, tried to explain that the smoke was leaking into his room, but before he could finish, she blew a puff right in his face, making him cough. The woman smiled, clearly pleased, and asked what he was going to do about it. She knew that this kind of confrontation wasn't his strong suit, but challenged him to try and make her quit smoking, convinced he didn't have the guts to pull it off. On top of that, she mocked him for being short and skinny, comparing him to a child. Those words reminded Kay of the comments he had endured his entire life due to his youthful appearance. Whenever he went to bars with his friends, they always ended up in trouble because sometimes he forgot his ID. At the office, his coworkers often made fun of his height, joking that he was probably lying about his age and saying that working alongside someone so short felt awkward. What Kay remembered the most was the time when, just before going to the movies with a girl he liked, she confessed that while she found him charming, he was simply too short and had a childish vibe that embarrassed her. The girl even wished him better luck in his next life, frustrated that she couldn't see him any other way. All of this made Kay in the present fill with anger as he shouted at the woman, telling her that he had been belittled his entire life. He demanded to know if she truly thought she had the right to treat him like that, reminding her of her own words about what he was going to do to stop her. In a defiant tone, he told her to go ahead and keep smoking because he wanted her to see exactly what he was capable of. Right at that moment, a towel the woman had around her neck slipped to the floor, and Kay, seeing this, forgot his anger and immediately blushed, feeling awkward as he realized he might have been too blunt with her. The woman, still annoyed by his words, watched as Kay, now embarrassed, tried to explain that he hadn't meant it that way and that he simply wanted to ask her to stop smoking. Without saying anything else, he quickly rushed back into his apartment, finally feeling safe. He cursed himself for losing his temper and showing all his anger, thinking now that she might retaliate at any moment. On the other hand, the woman experienced a strange feeling. As she picked up her towel, she recalled every word Kay had said and started to see him as someone surprisingly determined, even feeling that there was something manly about him. Without fully understanding why, she noticed her heart beginning to beat faster, though she couldn't quite identify the feeling stirring inside her. When the tough woman was left alone, she realized her face was completely red. However, someone else had been watching her. Another girl with pink hair, observing her from the corner, unable to understand what had just happened, especially with that boy who had unexpectedly confronted her friend. The next day, Kay was at the office, checking his phone and watching a video about how to reduce the harm caused by cigarette smoke. In his mind, he was doubting what to do next, feeling like he was slowly losing his sanity, especially as he remembered that he had actually gone to complain to his neighbor about the smoke. His anger had driven him to threaten her, and now he felt ashamed, thinking about how close he had been to, well, you know what I mean. To focus, he began slapping his cheeks anxiously, noticing that he hadn't smelled any smoke since the previous day, and his neighbor seemed genuinely upset. Yet this situation made him uneasy. He wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing. After all, he feared ending up like that martial artist, and was determined to find a way to avoid that fate. Suddenly, he recalled the last words that martial artist had said. If he wasn't mistaken, he heard Mapo Grizzly. He searched for it online as he remembered, and when he clicked on a video that popped up, he was shocked to see his neighbor on the screen. The title said that Mappo Grizzly had beaten up a group of bullies, and Kay immediately recognized her by her fierce expression, terrifying him even more. Just then, one of his coworkers approached Kay and noticed he was researching Mappo Grizzly, which caught his curiosity. Outside, his friend told him that he had heard about her since they had gone to the same school. He remembered that anyone who fought against her ended up beaten as if a truck had run them over. Even though he had only seen her once, it was impossible for anyone from their school not to know about her, as Mappo Grizzly had taken down all the gangsters from Yin. Around that area, they knew her as Crazy Seo, but at the same time, he was grateful to her since she was the one who got rid of all the thugs that used to bully him, as their school wasn't exactly the safest. He knew that Seo was extremely aggressive, although as long as you didn't provoke her, she wasn't a bad person. After hearing this, Kay mentally prepared himself to say goodbye to his life once and for all. However, his friend stopped him, not understanding what Kay was about to do. With teary eyes, Kay thought that perhaps ending everything would be for the best, though his friend tried to change his mind, asking him to come down so they could talk it over a little more, since Kay seemed to have accepted his grim fate. Meanwhile, back at the apartment complex, the girls were chatting about what had happened to Seo, something even she didn't quite understand, as it was the first time she had seen that boy. She knew he lived next door and had come to complain about the cigarette smoke. What surprised her even more was that her pink-haired friend now understood exactly who that annoying guy was. This is how we are introduced to Seo Yang, a 23-year-old woman fully aware that she is not the type of girl others imagine. She told her friends that she disliked fragile or weak men, and that she couldn't stand those who acted like parasites. Her ideal man was someone strong who could help her, like a stubborn drawer you need to force shut, and who had a masculine air about him. One of her friends interrupted, saying she was talking nonsense and was clearly lying since she knew Seo well and knew how bad she was at lying. Based on what Seo had just told them, she had seen her outside, almost like Eve, blushing and way too close to that guy. She then asked Seo if she seriously intended to lie to them like that. This comment came from Lana, her best friend and roommate, also 23 years old. Lana wanted Seo to be honest, especially since when she saw them together, they looked like more than just neighbors. That's why she insisted on asking if there really wasn't anything going on between them, until another friend jumped into the conversation, joking that Seo looked like a bear and that it was pretty unlikely anyone would fall for someone like her. That was Yurin, Seo's close friend and 20-year-old roommate. Yurin continued, saying that just a few days ago, Seo had tried to help a lost child find his mother, but upon seeing her, the child thought she was a kidnapper and refused to take her hand, bursting into tears and screaming for help. According to Yurin, Seo hadn't held a boy's hand since kindergarten and hadn't had that kind of contact in ages. Embarrassed, Seo covered Yurin's mouth and told her it wasn't true, but Yurin went on, saying that maybe that was why Seo had developed such a tough personality. Both Yurin and Lana kept pressing her, wanting to know what kind of relationship she had with the boy they saw the day before. Seo insisted it was just a misunderstanding, but Lana questioned her further, recalling how she had found her like Eve, and reminding her how Seo repeatedly claimed she had nothing to do with him. Lana concluded that they actually looked like a couple caught in the middle of a fight, which Seo immediately denied before kicking both girls out of her room, saying they were interrupting her training. Once Seo was alone, she recalled the moment Kay dared her to keep smoking. She didn't understand why she got so excited thinking about him, nor if it was simply because she needed to exercise more. Outside, Yurin seemed confused, thinking Seo just wanted to sleep, but Lana was deep in thought. Even though Seo lived with 4 people, she seemed embarrassed. Lana now realized there was something she had to do, especially knowing that the boy lived next door. She was really curious about him and wondered if it would be enough to greet him like a regular neighbor, or if she should try something else. Later, Kay checked that no one was in the hallway and sprinted to his apartment door. Not running into anyone, he felt like he had gotten lucky. Still, since they lived so close, he doubted it would be possible to ignore that tough girl for long. His sweet home, which he had worked so hard for, now felt like hell because of her, though he knew he couldn't keep avoiding the situation. Then suddenly, he heard a voice coming from next door. Startled, he turned and saw it was Lana, saying that they should have greeted each other properly earlier. A bit shy, she wanted to introduce herself to her neighbor and asked Kay if they could talk for a moment, hoping her plan would work. That same afternoon, Lana was completely amazed when she stepped into Kay's apartment. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It felt like she had entered another world, the kind she imagined belonged to rich people. What surprised her most was the number of comics he owned, many of which she had always wanted to read. There was also a state-of-the-art air conditioner, high-end furniture, and a top-quality bed, not to mention the gaming console every gamer dreamed of, and high-speed internet. Lana also spotted another console she had wanted to buy back then, but could never find in stock. Now, seeing it right before her eyes, she felt like she was in paradise and wished she could have lived in a place like that at least once. Meanwhile, Kay started recalling that Lana mentioned coming from the apartment next door, which made him wonder if she lived with the intimidating woman who looked like a gangster. He couldn't quite process the idea, especially since Lana gave off such a cheerful vibe, and he doubted that someone like her could get along with Mappo Grizzly. He thought about how he had let her in without even knowing who she was and began to worry. He couldn't be sure if that fearsome neighbor had sent her, but he decided to stay on guard. Then, Lana put a manga aside and asked if he had been with Seo the day before, something Kay didn't immediately understand. Lana went on to explain that even if he hadn't noticed, the way Seo had dropped her towel was unusual. For her, it was also the first time seeing Seo like that. She knew Seo as someone who preferred fists over words and rarely spoke with anyone for more than 3 minutes. Knowing that Kay had spent so much time talking with Seo, and on top of that being a man, made Lana's cheeks flush with curiosity, wondering what kind of man Kay really was. Besides, she also thought about the cigarette smell issue and had plenty of questions about it. At that moment, as Lana got a little too close, Kay started to get nervous. However, she casually mentioned that she wanted to rest for a bit and asked if it was okay. Before long, Lana had fallen asleep, but the most anxious one was Kay, who couldn't understand how she had just dozed off like that. He kept thinking about the fact that she came from the apartment next door and suspected she might be up to something, though maybe it was just his imagination. He wanted to wake her up right away, since if she stayed any longer, his legs might start cramping. Plus, Lana was constantly shifting around, her feet moving too much from side to side, and Kay feared that when she woke up, she might accuse him of being a pervert or even report him. Yet he noticed that she was deeply asleep and that her movements didn't seem intentional. Lana shifted again, and her feet ended up touching Kay's lap. Kay felt like he was in serious trouble. If she kept moving, she might end up accusing him of something he hadn't done. He knew he needed to get her off him gently, carefully taking his time not to wake her. Even though he wasn't doing anything wrong, he wanted to be extremely cautious. Right at that moment, Lana began to wake up, which startled Kay. However, she simply apologized and admitted that she had been awake for a while. Her reaction seemed very playful, and now Lana confirmed to herself that Kay wasn't a bad person. Inside, Kay wondered what she had been thinking of him, especially as he watched her teasing people like it was second nature. To him, she seemed like a complete troublemaker. Even so, nervously, he told her that even if they were neighbors, entering a stranger's home and acting like that could cause serious problems. But Lana had never acted that way with anyone else before. To her, Kay's face was very cute, and he seemed kind and shy, exactly her type. So she leaned in closer, playfully asking what he thought of her. Kay, on his part, was shocked and didn't understand how he ended up in such a situation so suddenly. Even while listening to Lana, he could hardly believe this was happening. Stuttering, he tried to explain that he liked her too, since she was very pretty, but also pointed out that it was barely their first meeting. Seeing him flustered, Lana laughed and admitted that she was just joking. She had been messing with him the whole time. This annoyed Kay a little, but before he could say anything, they heard a noise from the other side of the room. When they checked, they found Yurin, who had fallen over while trying to grab some food. She explained that she had come to look for Lana. After a while, everyone sat down, and Lana took the opportunity to ask Yurin if Seo had sent her, which Yurin confirmed. Lana had actually thought Seo would come herself to pick her up. Yurin explained that when she told Seo that Lana was at the neighbor's apartment, Seo's face turned red, and she started getting flustered, so she sent Yurin to bring her back. Then, Kay interrupted the conversation, asking how Yurin had gotten into his house, a bit concerned. Yurin explained that the door had been left open, which made Kay immediately scold her, saying that could be considered trespassing. He even warned her that if he decided to report it, she could get arrested, especially since she was still casually eating bread she had found there. Nervously, Yurin tried to justify herself, saying that she had tripped and saw the bread on the floor, so she thought it was going to be thrown away and decided to eat it. She explained that she had only entered on her own, not to steal anything, but simply to look for her friend. While doing so, she got hungry and wanted to try a piece of the bread, begging Kay not to report her. At this, Kay gave her an intimidating look, but Lana quickly stepped in and apologized on Yurin's behalf. She explained that her friend wasn't a bad person, just a little clumsy, and asked him to forgive her, just this once, giving him a charming smile. Embarrassed, Kay agreed, mostly because they were neighbors. though deep down he felt like he was making a mistake and should have done the opposite. However, he told Yurin that the bread she was eating had already expired, and he had planned to throw it away anyway. Yurin immediately started coughing, not expecting to be eating something spoiled. At that moment, Lana suggested they properly introduce themselves, as they hadn't done so yet, mostly to lighten the mood and see if they could build a friendly relationship as neighbors. But before doing so, Lana started getting ready for something and mentioned there was something she'd been wanting to do there for a while, which made Kay blush, not understanding what she meant. Lana, with a playful smile, stared at him and asked how he felt about it. Kay was annoyed to see the girls playing an exercise video game. He couldn't fully grasp what was going on, but Lana seemed to be getting more and more excited. Even though he felt awkward, he couldn't stop watching her, so he didn't have many reasons to complain. Just then, there was a loud knock on the door. Kay rushed to open it, thinking it was a neighbor coming to complain about the noise. However, as soon as he opened the door, Seo barged in, shoving him against the wall while shouting, "Pervert!" Right away, she began demanding to know where the children were. Shocked, Kay shouted back that he had no idea what she was talking about. Seo called out to the girls to come out, and Lana and Yurin, surprised, paused the game and looked at her. Seo stared at the scene in disbelief, and once everything was cleared up, Lana apologized to Kay for their lack of tact. Seo, however, was still grumpy, but Lana nudged her with her elbow, signaling her to apologize. Blushing, Seo mumbled a half-hearted apology. Kay thought she actually looked cute, but Seo, flustered, shouted that she didn't feel sorry for anything and that, in fact, he should be the one apologizing for staring at her chest the other day. The girls were stunned by what Seo had just said. Lana quickly approached her, embarrassed by such a comment. Kay broke the tension by saying he hadn't really expected an apology, especially from someone who had just stormed into his home and nearly strangled him. He reminded Seo of the time she wasn't properly dressed, assuring her that he wasn't the pervert. If anything, she was the one acting inappropriately. These comments enraged Seo, who threatened him with her hand, making Kay tremble with fear. She cornered him against the wall, saying that she understood everything, but scolded him for worrying too much about what others thought, especially since smoking inside her own home wasn't even illegal. Kay, overwhelmed by the intimidation, felt like his heart was about to explode from fear, but he couldn't back down now. Still, he told her it was ridiculous for her, as the aggressor, to act as if she didn't remember her own mistakes. He asked her why she was so confident and made it clear that he didn't actually mind her smoking, but Seo didn't seem to understand the damage she had caused. Since Seo was unwilling to apologize, Kay wanted to clarify things once and for all. If she kept ignoring the issue like it was nothing, he would report her. Without realizing it, Kay was now very close to Seo, and she pointed it out. Terrified, he denied there being anything between them, although he admitted she had thrown him off balance. At that moment, Lana gently touched his hand and realized the real issue was all about the cigarette smoke. Lana suggested that instead of fighting, they should solve it like adults. Kay, blushing, didn't quite understand, so Lana proposed that they all live together. Seo immediately rejected the idea, but Lana insisted, arguing that Seo couldn't really refuse since her apartment lacked many things. She didn't have proper internet, air conditioning, food, and even her washing machine was broken. Seo didn't deny it. Lana added that the last time Seo had humiliated a poor guy, she ended up having to pay for the damages, which infuriated the landlord. If they caused trouble again, they would be kicked out. Yurin, the most dramatic of the group, expressed her fear of ending up on the streets with nothing to eat. Seo began to hesitate, wondering if she really wanted to keep bothering Kang. When she looked at him and saw that he was blushing, she realized that the idea of living together didn't sound so bad after all. As for Kay, he felt like they were ignoring his opinion, even though it was his apartment. Still, at least things ended on good terms, considering the situation could have turned out much worse. Although he doubted whether it was normal for so many women to live with just one man, he figured it might not be all bad. At that moment, Lana clapped her hands enthusiastically, announcing that since no one was against the idea, they would start living together. Before that, they thought it would be good to do a little introduction, since they would be seeing each other quite often from now on. Lana was the first to introduce herself, saying her name was Lana Fox. She was 23 years old, and she lived with her best friend Seo, who was the same age. Kay, surprised by her name, thought she was joking and asked why she didn't have a Korean name. She explained that her mother was Korean and her father was American, which is why she had such a strange name, though now her parents lived in the US. She bragged that even if she wasn't 100% Korean, the only difference was her blue eyes. She asked Kay to just call her Lana. Next, she introduced Seo, whom she described as the big one standing next to her, praising how strong she was. Then she started joking with Kay about the buns Seo brought, which obviously annoyed Seo. Lastly, she presented the youngest of the group, Yurin, who was busy eating a popsicle she had found in Kay's fridge. Lana mentioned that there was actually one more person living with them, but that unfortunately the plot didn't require her yet, leaving Kay completely confused, not understanding what she meant. Excited, Lana insisted that Kay should introduce himself too, hoping they would all become close. Kay introduced himself as their 27-year-old neighbor and asked them to treat him well. When the introductions ended, Lana, with a flirty tone, asked if she should call him Appa. This made Seo angry, scolding Lana for not taking things seriously, but Lana just joked that she wasn't flirting. She was simply spending some charity time with their neighbor, which made Seo even angrier as she demanded Lana stop. Despite the tension, Lana remained optimistic that everything would work out, while Kay, deep inside, was absolutely terrified. It was at this point that Kay began narrating that, just as he had feared, his peaceful life turned into a real nightmare. The next day after the girls moved in, everything changed. Since that visit, they kept coming over daily and even started entering without knocking. All of Kay's efforts to create a personal sanctuary of peace were in vain. Before he knew it, his home had become a shared space, all thanks to Lana's plans. As he watched his home descend into chaos, he regretted ever having the courage to talk to his neighbor. Still, Seo felt quite embarrassed about everything, and Kay couldn't understand how things had reached this point. After work, Kay just wanted to get home early to relax. However, when he reached his building, he was visibly shaken, worried about the possibility of the girls showing up at his place again. He realized he had completely misjudged the situation. He knew that if he wanted to relax, he would have to make the most of the free hours around noon when they were usually out, especially since he couldn't go back on his promise. However, this time he was sure he would be alone, which meant he could peacefully watch a religious video online and play for a while afterward. It was the perfect plan to enjoy his precious free time. But when he entered, he found Seo in his living room as God had brought her into the world. The surprise made Kay blush as he wondered what she was doing there. Although he tried to act normal, he couldn't help but stare at her for a moment, which led Seo to throw a towel at him to make him stop looking. Later, Kang was in his room playing games, while Seo sat on his bed scrolling through her phone. To him, the situation felt like a huge problem. He didn't understand why she was still there. From what he had heard, Seo was supposed to be at the gym. The awkwardness made him think it would be best to apologize first, especially since he wanted to break the tense atmosphere. Plus, he believed it was the right thing to do as a responsible adult. Just as he was about to apologize, Seo suddenly approached him threateningly and demanded that he leave. She explained that every time she saw him, it made her want to punch him, so she preferred he wasn't around. Kay tried to remind her that they were, in fact, in his house, but Seo brushed it off, saying she had arrived first. Despite everything, Kay couldn't take his eyes off her. Seo noticed and asked if he wanted to see her like he had just done moments ago, which he immediately denied. Still, she insisted that she couldn't be near someone like him, and again told him to leave. Kay, knowing full well he was in his own room, began to grow irritated by Seo's persistence. Finally, he raised his voice and asked what was wrong with her. If anyone should leave, it should be her, especially since she was the one invading his space. To him, the only pervert in that room was clearly Seo. Just as Seo seemed ready to hit him, she remembered she needed to control herself. But Kay didn't miss the chance to point out that she kept addressing him informally, even though he was older. That only made Seo ask with a defiant tone if he really wanted her to hit him. Seo mentioned that she planned to talk to Lana and Yurin since all of this felt ridiculous to her. However, Kay noticed that she pulled something out of her pocket and tried to light it. He immediately tried to stop her, especially since they were inside his room. Calmly, Seo raised her hand, stopping him, and asked what exactly he was trying to do. This embarrassed Kay, especially because of his short height, which made Seo burst into laughter. She couldn't take him seriously. It was amusing to her how he kept trying to grab the item without success due to the height difference. To tease him even more, Seo ended up tucking it between her chest and mocked him by saying that now she was at his level if he wanted to try again. Kay just sighed, visibly annoyed, and commented that this was probably why she didn't have a boyfriend. The comment struck Seo, leaving her visibly embarrassed. Even though she tried to respond, she couldn't find the right words. This encouraged Kay to finish her off by saying that she probably hadn't even held a guy's hand, let alone been in a relationship. Kang's words infuriated Seo, who couldn't believe what she had just heard. Despite her anger, all she managed to shout was that he hadn't had a girlfriend either, much less gone on a date, calling him a brat. Those words created an awkward silence between them, but Kei decided to ignore it. He noticed Seo was visibly nervous, trying to come up with something that could hurt him, but all she could think of was repeating brat. Seo kept teasing him, saying that Kei wouldn't even know what to do on a date and that no one would want one with someone like him. That pushed Kei to the limit. Fed up, he impulsively grabbed Seo's hand, reminding her that she was always calling him a brat and scolding her for it. But this time, he was determined to prove he wasn't one. For Seo, that threat sounded empty. She wasn't scared. Instead, she provoked him even more by calling him brat again. This enraged Kei, who was tired of being defined by his height. Seo, amused, wanted to see what he would do, since, in her eyes, he was still a child incapable of doing anything serious. That was the last straw. Determined to change Seo's perception, Kei leaned forward and kissed her. At that moment, the kiss left Seo completely speechless, unable to process what was happening. She was stunned that Kei had actually done it. When he pulled away, he quickly told her that he hoped that would be enough to make her stop mocking him. However, Seo didn't respond. She remained wide-eyed, stunned by what had just happened. On the other hand, Kei thought that now it would be impossible for her to ignore him. He felt satisfied with himself after enduring so many of her taunts, believing he had finally left all that behind. Yet, when he tried to get Seo to react, he had no success. He wondered why she remained frozen. Had the kiss really caught her that off guard? It was then that he decided to take advantage of the situation to return some of the teasing. Kei immediately smiled and, with a mocking tone, commented that he understood it had probably been Seo's first kiss. But even so, he was disappointed. He couldn't believe that someone like her, known worldwide as Mapo Grizzly, could be left speechless by something so simple. Despite her terrifying reputation, Seo seemed completely disoriented by such a trivial gesture, especially given how arrogant she usually was. Kei asked if maybe he should have been more considerate with her, since it was now clear who the real child between them was. He added that he hoped she wouldn't mess with him anymore. Annoyed, Seo snapped back, demanding to know if he was seriously mocking her. She even commented that elementary school kids in her neighborhood could do the same thing. She assumed Kei had probably practiced kissing by watching videos, and didn't hesitate to call him a clumsy little guy. With an air of superiority, Seo claimed that despite how much she teased him, the only thing Kei had managed to do was give her that insignificant kiss. Once again, she called him a little boy, emphasizing that she saw him as weak. Sarcastically, she questioned who would ever treat him like a real man. Those words deeply angered Kei, who demanded to know if she was just pretending to act tough because he had kissed her. Seo replied calmly that she was simply telling the truth. Seeing how angry he became, she realized she had hit the mark. This only irritated Kei even more, and he decided to end the conversation, feeling there was no point in continuing. He thought that if it weren't for him, Seo would have never received a kiss in her life. To him, she was just someone who only knew how to annoy him, and he doubted there was a single man on earth who could possibly be interested in someone as unbearable as her. Although Seo was furious at the last comment, she quickly burst out laughing, realizing that Kei was just bluffing. She noticed that as he spoke, a peculiar glow came from the pendant he was trying to hide. She recalled all the teasing she had thrown at him and concluded that his words were just childish bravado. Deep down, she had even pretended to like the kiss a little, and that alone had made Kei overly excited. Though he tried to explain that it was something out of his control, Seo didn't care. To her, it was obvious that Kang was far too fervent in his faith, and yet dared to boast in front of her as if nothing had happened. With a mischievous smile, Kei asked if she was really in a position to say anything. He even commented that he could almost see the corruption overflowing from Seo's soul, and added a provocative joke about needing to wash her bedsheets. He continued teasing her, claiming that a simple kiss had revealed how corrupt her soul truly was. According to him, Seo only pretended to be tough on the outside, but secretly longed to be dominated by someone else. Angry, Seo reacted furiously, landing a powerful kick to Kei's stomach while cursing him. Kei collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain and coughing as he struggled to catch his breath. Without mercy, Seo told him that he was in no position to speak to her that way. However, despite the pain, Kei shot back, saying that she always solved things with brute force. According to him, whenever someone was weaker than her, she would ignore them, harass them, and belittle them. But he added that he didn't care how strong or powerful she was, because as long as she was still a woman, she wouldn't be able to move if he held the Bible by his side. Those words made Seo's head feel like it exploded, as if something inside her had been waiting to hear exactly that. Seo called him crazy and dared him to at least try it once. She told him that if he really could make her unable to move, she would even start calling him Appa, teasing him further by asking if he would keep bluffing. But Kei didn't back down a single step. He was determined and assured her that he had no regrets and would give it a try. Both of them prepared for what seemed to be a real ceremony, but as they got so close, they began to question their own words. Were they really about to go through with it? In that instant, both the chalice and Seo's corrupted soul seemed to react. Kei wondered to himself what he should do. He had only wanted to scare her, never imagining things would go this far. However, as he saw her up close, he noticed something he hadn't before. Seo was incredibly attractive. His heart started pounding, and he couldn't stop thinking about what to do next. The chalice whispered to him that it was time to start the ritual. Kei knew he couldn't back out now. He had come too far and would have to let things take their course. With determination, he began the first prayer of the ceremony. While Kei was embarrassed, Seo acted as if nothing was happening. Kei questioned what that meant. He couldn't move at all, not that he was completely paralyzed, but if he moved even slightly, he risked spilling the holy water. He wondered if it had something to do with Seo's physical strength, as the corruption in her heart was overwhelming. Now he had to show he could lead the ceremony skillfully. He couldn't just yell commands and then stand there doing nothing. Yet he wasn't even sure if any of it made sense, especially considering he was next to Mapo Grizzly, a terrifying woman, dominated by violence and known as a fearsome gangster, who was now calmly participating in the ceremony with him. He also knew that if things continued like this and he messed up, Seo would never stop mocking him for being a braggart, so much so that just thinking about it gave him a headache. Suddenly, he felt everything was lost since he literally couldn't get out of the situation anymore. He called himself an idiot for pretending he knew how to lead a ceremony when in reality, he had no clue. Now, all he could hope for was that Seo would just laugh at him. However, he noticed that Seo was unusually quiet, and above all, seemed uneasy. This made him think that maybe this was his chance. He told her that she didn't have to push herself, and that if she couldn't handle it, she could complain if she needed to. Seo, somewhat annoyed, replied that she hadn't felt anything from the first prayer and told him to stop saying nonsense. Still, Kei noticed she was lying. He could see how she was actually enjoying the ceremony, although she kept insisting that she felt nothing. She swore the first verse hadn't affected her at all, but Kei didn't believe her. Then Seo reminded him of his own words. Once the reading began, she wouldn't be able to move. Yet it all felt absurd since the boy clearly had no idea how an actual ceremony worked. However, she assumed that what really kept him from moving was the peace within his heart, and unlike him, she was supposedly unaffected. But deep down, Seo knew it was a lie. The truth was that she had felt such deep peace that it had taken her breath away. At first, her heart hurt, but she didn't understand why. Later, she started to feel good, and then she remembered something she had overheard once in a public restroom. Two girls were talking about how one of them had performed a ceremony with her boyfriend. It was something she had eagerly awaited, although it didn't go as she had imagined. Seo recalled the girl mentioning that at first, her soul hurt because of the corruption in her heart, and she thought she would die in that instant. She never expected something like that could happen during a ceremony, especially as Seo's heart was now feeling slightly numb, leaving her lost in her thoughts. Returning to the present, Seo realized it wasn't painful. On the contrary, she felt peace in her heart. However, she also noticed her strength was fading little by little, as if she were floating among the clouds. She knew that if the ceremony didn't continue, she wouldn't be able to endure it. At that moment, Kei commented that her face was way too red and asked if she was feeling all right. Seo, annoyed, shouted at him, asking how many times she had to tell him that she didn't feel anything from the ceremony. Despite her hysterical reaction, Kei silently worried about her, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Seo told Kei that he was just getting desperate to find the path to God, and that if he really wanted to do so, he should start reading the Bible faster. She found the pace they were going at unsatisfying. Or was it, she teased, simply because he was too weak and didn't know what he was doing? That comment enraged Kang. Seeing that Seo was still acting so arrogant, he decided to prove who would go further on the path of God. Without hesitation, he began reading the Bible without pause. It was then that he heard a faint moan from Seo. Smirking, he asked what that strange sound had been. Now it was clear that she had been pretending to be strong, mocking him, while in reality, she was enjoying the consecration alongside a little weakling. However, since he was the one leading the ceremony, her true self seemed to be coming to light. "Why don't you fulfill the promise you made to me?" Kei asked. Seo, feigning indifference, replied that she had just coughed a little and accused him of going deaf. She realized that he actually expected her to call him Appa, But instead of giving him that satisfaction, she reminded him confidently that if he wanted her to call him that, he'd have to work much harder because, so far, the ceremony wasn't doing anything for her. She even called him a little boy, which made Kang even angrier. "Then I won't hold back anymore. I'm serious now," he warned. But Seo couldn't care less how many times he tried. She was sure the result would be the same. However, before they could continue, she asked him to wait and removed a small triangular charm she wore to make herself feel more at ease. Seo said she wanted to offer a prayer for a little puppy, claiming it would make her more comfortable. But deep down, her real purpose was different. She couldn't allow herself to show a pathetic expression in front of Kay. If she lost control, he would become even more arrogant and start acting like a real leader. She had to make sure he didn't catch any signs of her weakness or any small moan. That's when Kay noticed how the corruption was seeping out from Seo's heart. He hadn't expected her to ask for a prayer for a puppy, but somehow he found it tempting. He knew he had to see the ceremony through to the end. Determined, he began reading the first paragraph of the Bible. Seo, confused, felt how the words cleansed the corruption of her deepest sins. For her, this was dangerous. If she made a mistake, she could expose herself without realizing it. She had to resist at all costs. No matter what, she had to make Kay fail first and spill the holy water. That way, she could mock him as much as she pleased. However, during his prayers, Kay began to feel Seo's soul pulling him in, as if her sins were actively being purified. Then he decided to try something else. He grabbed a pair of gummy buttons and showed them to her, hoping that Seo would get embarrassed when she saw them. Seo, puzzled, wondered why the boy had suddenly picked up the gummy buttons. Without wasting time, Kay challenged her, saying that if she kept acting like this, he would keep using the buttons while she claimed to feel nothing from the ceremony. Seo wanted him to stop with the nonsense. She was a bit surprised but ended up laughing, thinking that he was just playing around by pressing on her buns, which seemed childish. Even though it had startled her a moment ago when he grabbed them without warning, she didn't want him to think he was getting ahead of himself. After all, she didn't care what a kid like him did. Kay, on the other hand, wanted to know if she was serious. So he kept playing with the gummy buttons, mentioning that it seemed like every little movement caused Seo's soul to react. It's not like he wasn't aware of the situation, but any man would dream of holding buns as big as melons. For now, his only desire was to keep playing with them. This slightly annoyed Seo, who threatened him, asking if he wasn't going to let go. But Kay kept going, making Seo blush as she realized she couldn't do anything against him. Ever since he started playing with the buttons, she felt her strength leaving her. Now she understood that her weak spot was the gummy buttons, which meant she was in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Kay thought that Seo still had enough strength to endure the ceremony, but he could feel that her soul was starting to loosen little by little. What he really needed was for her to stumble and spill the holy water first. That way, he would make sure she never looked down on him again. In fact, he was eager to see just how much more Seo could endure. And so they continued with their prayers in search of peace. But Seo began to doubt everything. She wondered if she had always been this weak. There was no way Kay could be doing something like this, especially since he wasn't supposed to have anything special. He was small and fragile. Yet there he was, reading the Bible and holding the buttons without breaking a sweat. It was something that simply shouldn't have been happening. What unsettled her the most was the calmness she felt in her heart while he kept praying. Seo admitted she couldn't stand it. She questioned whether she should just give up, but she couldn't. She had to see this through to the end. Even though she felt like she was on the verge of a divine revelation, it would be better to swallow her pride and surrender. Still, she flat out refused. She had never lost in her life, and this wasn't going to be the first time, especially not against a cocky weakling. She decided to do her best, just like the actress she used to secretly admire. She had to keep calm. This wasn't a reason to make a scene. She could handle it. Or maybe, would it look bad? She couldn't allow someone so arrogant to lead the ceremony. She needed to completely overpower him so he'd never dare act superior again. She would go all out to prove who was truly in charge. This surprised Kang, as he didn't expect her to suddenly take control of the ceremony. Su thought it might be because he had read the first passage of the Bible too quickly, since she felt her soul becoming a bit more sensitive. However, she needed to hold out until Kay gave up first. She kept telling herself that she was only doing all this just so she could scold him later. Nothing more. Meanwhile, Kay wondered about this sudden pressure coming from Seo's heart. If her corruption kept increasing like that, she wouldn't be able to last another 30 seconds without going for the holy water. However, feeling a warm sensation in his own heart, He couldn't stop praying, so much so that he even gave Seo a few gentle pats, which made her snap at him, demanding to know who he thought he was to just do whatever he wanted. Yet Kay ignored her and continued his prayers. At that moment, he felt the urge to grab the holy water, so he used everything he had to purify the girl's soul. That afternoon, when Seo and Kay were resting after the ceremony, Seo, lost in her thoughts, cursed herself for having lost her strength to the point of almost fainting. She couldn't accept it. How was it possible that someone as insignificant as Kay had led her to a divine revelation? She thought she'd never allow it, but now she wondered if she was the one who had always been weak. She had been the conqueror of soul, and now she felt fragile because of someone she considered insignificant. The frustration and humiliation ate away at her, but what angered her the most was remembering how that brat had patted her during the ceremony. Why hadn't she said anything at the time? Had she gone crazy? Although it was hard to believe, she wondered if she had been the only one who used the holy water. Judging by the purification of her soul, she supposed that both she and Kang had used enough to achieve their cleansing. Maybe if she insisted on doing another ceremony, he would never find out about her little slip-up. However, interrupted her thoughts with a simple question. Had she lost? She wanted to know her honest opinion about the boy she so often called a brat. Although Seo yelled and acted like nothing had happened, Kang was sure that she had used the holy water too. Despite her denial, he had noticed it, in her awkward movements, her intense prayers, and even in her divine revelation. Seo, on the other hand, demanded to know exactly when she was supposed to have used the water. She claimed it had never happened. How could she have done that with an idiot like him? Besides, she believed Kay had no right to brag, since, even though he was a show-off, he had also used plenty of holy water on himself. She didn't want him to get cocky. Faced with this, Kay thought it was best to just call it a draw. After all, they would be seeing each other often now. The boy asked her to stop mocking him. However, before saying goodbye, Seo pushed him and, in that instant, told him that if he wanted to leave, he would first have to admit that he had lost. She stared him down and asked if he really thought he could walk away unpunished after sharing a ceremony with her. She wouldn't let him go until he accepted his defeat. When Seo was about to read the Bible, she suddenly burst into laughter. She finally understood why Kay was in such a hurry to finish the ceremony. With a mocking smile, she asked if he was still making fun of her like before, or if he had suddenly lost his voice. Feeling awkward, Kay lied, saying that the glow of the chalice was just an illusion caused by work stress, although he quickly backtracked, clarifying that yes, it was stress-related, but not all glows were like that, and it definitely had nothing to do with her. However, Seo grabbed the chalice and noticed how its glow intensified more and more, confirming her suspicions. She also saw that a little holy water was overflowing, which could be interpreted as a sign that her faith in God was burning with fervor. Looking at Kang, she asked why it kept glowing if all he wanted was to play around again and lose. If that was the case, he just had to say so. Kay, however, didn't think he had lost. He demanded that she speak clearly because he wasn't the one who had failed. It was Seo who had spilled the holy water when he gave her those pats. In fact, he had noticed the wet spot on the couch's sheet. That only proved she wasn't as strong as she claimed. Seo, confused, asked what he was talking about but soon started mocking him again. She didn't expect that she might actually enjoy that sort of thing. Although, thinking about it, she hadn't resisted even once, so maybe she did like it after all. She seemed excited when he gave her those pats, and if she analyzed it, wasn't that what people called a math? That comment irritated Seo quite a bit, as she knew that Kay was being arrogant to the very end. Still, he insisted that since it was over, he only asked her to stop making fun of him. At the end of the day, it was the little weakling who had won. However, Seo grabbed the Bible to settle the argument, surprising Kang. He tried to stop her, but she ignored him and continued praying at her own pace. She even urged him to keep talking while they prayed, promising that she would teach him such a harsh lesson he wouldn't be able to stand afterward. Still, in her thoughts, Seo knew she needed to hold out. However, noticing that Kang was starting to make small mistakes, she figured he must already be at his limit. He probably needed holy water, which meant the previous ceremony had exhausted him more than he admitted. If she guided him properly this time, she would make sure he never dared challenge her again. Just then, she heard Kay say that he had had enough. Lately, work had been way too stressful, and after she and her friends had barged into his house, it was driving him crazy. He felt like he wasn't even doing enough during the ceremony. That's why this time, he would be the one to properly lead the Mass. He grabbed the Bible and began reading at full speed. Because of this, neither of them noticed that Lana was calling out to Seo. Even so, Kay kept reading the Bible intensely, so much so that Seo silently wondered what was going on with him. Now he was reading faster than before. Despite everything, she felt a sense of inner peace with each prayer, until Kay stopped and asked if she was still trying to hide her moans. However, when Seo insulted him in response, he just smiled and said he was hoping she would shout at him. Still, she didn't want him to get cocky by calling him a little boy. Even though he acted like he knew what he was doing, she didn't quite see it that way. However, Kay resumed his prayers and commented that he didn't expect her to still have enough strength to resist. He seemed a bit impressed, so he continued the ceremony at an even faster pace. It never crossed Seo's mind that she would end up in the worst position. She couldn't even hide her embarrassing moans anymore, much less counterattack during the ceremony. She felt pathetic. She couldn't believe she was being guided by a man to the point where she began comparing herself to someone utterly insignificant. But what frustrated her the most was the fact that it was a brat who was helping her find the path to God. She couldn't allow it. However, Kay's prayers didn't stop, so much so that Seo ended up eating 2 buns with the gummy buttons she had brought. That's when she asked Kay what he was doing, but he didn't even bother to answer and continued enjoying his little snack, something that Seo cursed internally because she didn't know how much longer he would keep going. Finally, the boy resumed reading the Bible, and Seo realized that, in her mind, this wasn't just a bet anymore. It had become a matter of pride. She was so furious she no longer wanted to continue with the ceremony, although deep down, she had to admit that there was a certain peace in her heart. At that moment, Kay went for the holy water to purify her sins. Fortunately for both of them, part of her soul managed to free itself from corruption. Even though Seo looked exhausted, she realized she no longer had the strength to keep going. And if they continued the consecration, it would be too overwhelming. She cursed Kay for everything he had done and swore she would make him pay. But first, she needed to rest. As she tried to leave, muttering her vengeance, Kay smiled and asked where she was going. Was she trying to run away? Suddenly, he pulled out a photo of a little puppy and said he would pray for it, leaving Seo completely stunned. Seeing her expression, Kay asked why she was looking at him like that. After all, wasn't she the one who wanted him to give up? For now, they still had a long way to go to finish the ceremony. However, Seo asked him to stop, saying that they needed rosaries and could go out and buy some since they were good for the holy water. Or, if it was too much trouble, she would even invite him to have some soup, all expenses covered. Besides, Lana was about to arrive, and it might be best to stop the ceremony for now. A bit nervous, she suggested they just call it a draw, and maybe, if the opportunity came, they could make another bet in the future. But Kay rejected the idea without hesitation. He was just getting started guiding her. Seo tried to stop him, but he blamed her for having such a corrupted soul and restarted the consecration. In her mind, Seo cursed him again, unable to understand how someone so small could have so much stamina for a ceremony. She even begged him to at least give her a break, but his prayers continued through the entire afternoon, so much so that without realizing it, the day passed and night came. By then, Seo hadn't even noticed that she had 8 missed calls, but that was because both Kay and Seo were lying down, resting after the whole ceremony. At one point, Kay sat up, surprised at how far they had gone. He knew that, even though Seo mocked him by calling him a child, she now clearly understood the kind of lesson he had just given her. He hoped that with this, she would stop underestimating him because of his height. Next time, he wouldn't allow her to play with him again. As time passed, Kay started to wonder what time it was. He figured it had been about 2 hours since he last checked, but he didn't expect it to already be night. He knew he had to go to work the next day, but his legs and back hurt so much he felt like a mummy. Seeing Seo asleep, he thought she looked way too carefree, but his biggest question at that moment was what to do next. He realized he had lost his head for a moment and got carried away during the ceremony. And worst of all, it had happened with the least suitable person. Even so, he decided to leave the complicated thoughts for later and focus on tidying everything up before someone saw them. Unfortunately for him, Lana was already there, watching the whole scene. In his mind, Kay wondered how long she had been standing there, since the situation could easily be misunderstood, and he had no idea how to explain it, especially because the room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Just as he was about to say that it wasn't what it looked like, Lana quickly closed the door. As for Lana, she was left wondering if her eyes were really seeing the truth. She couldn't help but ask herself what had happened. Still, it was hard to believe, and her biggest question was whether Kang and Seo had actually held a ceremony. The next morning, Seo quietly opened the door to her apartment, moving like a ninja, mainly to avoid anyone noticing her arrival. But to her misfortune, both Lana and Yurin were already waiting for her. Both of them asked her why she had disappeared all day yesterday only to show up at that hour, not to mention that she never replied to their messages. Esio was caught off guard, but knew she could come up with an explanation. However, the two insisted that she had never done anything like that before, as she was usually very disciplined, and it seemed suspicious to them. With a playful tone, they asked if she had something to confess. They also pointed out how much she was sweating and asked if she was feeling hot, noticing how nervous she looked. They pressed her, wanting to know who she had spent the previous day with, having a ceremony and leaving them behind, as it was too obvious for them to ignore. Seo took a step back, pretending not to understand and claiming she had no idea what they were talking about. She argued that she had spent the whole day training, and besides, they both knew perfectly well how things were between her and guys. She couldn't have been with anyone, considering how guys treated her. Still, neither of them believed a single word. That's when Yurin stepped closer, sniffed her slightly, and joked that she could smell a hint of lust. Seo, outraged, shouted that it was just sweat. Even so, she reminded them it was none of their business and went straight to her room. Neither of them said anything else, but Lena had an expression that clearly showed she was planning something amusing. Meanwhile, Seo, still a little red-faced, remembered the words of some boys from her school days. They used to mock her personality, calling her unbearable and saying that her strength was ridiculously exaggerated, even comparing her to a gorilla. But what hurt her the most was the fact that they never saw her as a girl. She often wondered if there was anyone in the world capable of seeing her as a woman, as according to those boys, no one could have such strange tastes. They assured her that she would live alone forever, and those words had affected her more than she liked to admit. But now, in the present, she couldn't believe it. She had actually performed a ceremony with a boy. This confirmed that someone could in fact see her as a woman. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but with that, she realized how wrong her old classmates had been. However, what bothered her the most was that her first consecration had been with a weakling like Kang. Even though she saw him as fragile, he had guided her, patted her, and even used holy water throughout the entire ceremony. That memory made her blush. Trying to clear her mind, she started singing softly to herself since everything had been too overwhelming. Yet she quickly regained her composure and asked herself what exactly she was doing. In that instant, she cursed Kang, calling him a brat. She couldn't understand how he dared to toy with her and guide her however he pleased. Still, she was sure that her revenge would be the greatest of all.